Welcome back to Digital Design Digest. I'm sure you've all heard the term garbage in, garbage out. And this term in photo editing really goes to the fact that while computer software can correct a multitude of problems, sometimes there just really isn't anything that can be done in editing to save a photo. And so we're going to look at a couple situations that can possibly be salvaged and those that are not. And talk a little bit about why that is. So the first thing we're going to look at is this photo here of a geranium. You can see we've got a couple different things going on here. First of all, we see it's highly saturated in red. And in this part of the image, we've lost quite a bit of detail. It's actually very blurry. And even if the edges were a little bit clearer, we've lost a lot of detail because of the high level of saturation. You're seeing a lot of highlights up here, and the midtones and the shadows are pretty much blending in, so you can't even see the individual petals or anything like that. However, when you get down to where it's less saturated in red, you're seeing the individual fibers of the stem, and even these buds here are much clearer and more defined than the flower. When you get up here to this particular flower though, even though it's just as red as this flower, things worked out better in lighting for you to be able to see the individual petals and even see some detail within the petals here of the veining and the ways in which this flower is just about ready to open up. So we have a couple options here. We can either try to salvage the whole picture and bring this part of the picture back into something that gives a little more detail and show both of these flower buds together. Or we can talk about possibly cropping out this part of the photo and only showing this part of the photo, this part of the flower, for whatever use we may want, whether it be on a website, a postcard, in a video, whatever. So let's try to salvage this photo. If we went into adjustments and we started out where we normally start in levels, we're going to try to brighten and bring out more of the shadows. And if you're looking at what's happening here, just by virtue of brightening it a little bit, we've lost some detail now in the part of the photo that was actually the best part before we adjusted it. And what was oversaturated to begin with became even more so over here, just by brightening it. It looks more like a big paint blob. And we've lost a lot of the detail and the veining on these petals. So we're going to bring this back to what it was before. And by adjusting the shadows and darkening up the background, what we've done is we've made this good flower pop off the page even more and bring out a little bit more definition in its veins, which are considered shadows. We don't want to overdo it because we don't want to end up having this become more of a caricature of a photo rather than a life still. We want to enhance in a natural way and not overdo it, because now this looks way too oversaturated. Even though we've kept some detail here, we've oversaturated the bud if we go too far with the shadow definition. And now we'll just work on the midtones a little. We'll come down here and adjust a little bit for the shadows, which if we did that, we actually lose, again, some definition. So we will not mess with that. And we'll take away just a little bit of some of the highlights and we'll add some definition. And as I'm doing this, I am really at this point keeping my eye on this flower over here, because with everything I do, it's not adjusting this flower to any great extent. And so what that's telling me at this point, even if I were to completely reduce the exposure, you'll see that what that ends up doing is it doesn't do anything to bring out the definition in this flower here, and it dulls the overall composition of the photo. So what that tells me is that now that we have corrected for the lighting of this bud, it tells me that if we want to salvage anything in this photo further, what we're really going to have to do is crop out everything around the good part of the good flower bud. Let's take a look at this rose petal, this rose flower. Now, you can see we're on a real red theme today. We got a bunch of problems going on here. It's dark, it's blurry, it's actually really rather granulated, and part of that is because while the shot composition in and of itself is great in terms of, the screen is filled up with the meaningful imagery of the rose. You get a very good shot of its detail and its petals, and you are seeing some shadows and highlights that really give a good idea of the shape of the rose. It's dark, it's grainy, and not nearly as clear as it could be in terms of definition. So we're going to go back into our edit function and adjustment, and we're going to try to brighten this up a little bit. We can add some exposure. And we don't want to go too out of control again with the shadows. We can actually do even less with shadows on this picture because of how dark it is than we could with the last picture we looked at. We can play around a little bit more with shadows and highlights down here. We can add some definition, but you'll see that as we add definition and even some sharpness, unfortunately what's happening is it's defining the granulation in the picture. And the reason we have this is, again, the original shot was taken in a setting that didn't have enough light to really fill in and create a smoother gradation between highlights and shadows. And this is where we get back to the statement at the beginning of this video clip, garbage in, garbage out. Because of the conditions that this photo was taken in to begin with, we're very limited, even with the program software we have, of what we can do to really salvage the image. And so at this point, a designer, or somebody who's just editing a photo would make the decision whether now this end result will serve the purposes for whatever they may want, or whether they want to go on and just try to find a better photo to work with for the project that they're working on. And I'm looking at this saying the shape of it's beautiful, how unfortunate that the picture wasn't taken in better lighting, but this really is not a usable image. There's just too much wrong with it. And there isn't anything else that can be done within these settings. Even on a higher end Photoshop program, which I also use, there really isn't too much that can be done with a photo like this to really fix it and make it what it could have been if it were photographed in better lighting quality. So we'll take a look at this. An African violet that was also filmed in some rather darker settings, a a little more light coming in on either side than we saw with the rose, although it was basically filmed in the same room. But one of the things that the object of the photography has going for it is that it in and of itself is a lighter colored object. It's going to reflect light out a little bit better than a rose will, which will kind of suck in what it has but not necessarily reflect it. The picture itself is already a little bit clearer than the rose was. We don't see nearly as much granulation. So if we go into editing, we'll work on brightening it up just a little bit. Playing with the shadows will help add a little bit more definition between the flowers and between the petals of the flowers. Because you can tell that the light, most of the light was coming in from this direction. This is automatically going to be just a little bit darker. So we don't want to try to make it all the same exposure because that's not what it's supposed to look like. But we want to be careful not to overexpose and keep as much detail here as possible. We can take away a little bit of the shadows over here on the left. Watch the left as I'm adjusting the shadows slider. As I remove some of the shadows, we see a lot more granulation in the green stems and even in some of the petals over here. And so we may want to make that judgment call and say it's better to kind of keep the green back in the shadows a little bit, because that's not really all that important to the composition. It's all about the flowers and the petals, really. And we also may want to keep the shadows down a little bit so that way the little bit of granulation we see where it's darker isn't as prevalent. Now we can keep this composition as it is, and because it's a very nice full screen of florals. Or again, we can choose, now that we've adjusted for the color, to look at cropping certain areas of it for a slightly different shot composition. And that's what one crop would look like. I personally, in looking at this, feel that the way that we started out was the better composition. We really don't get as good of a feel in cropping it down for the multitude of flowers that were here and the different shapes and how they collect as the plant is growing, and also even for the lighting of it. It was kind of nice having it. The shadows show that the florals go a little bit further back than what the photo is really showing. So I'm gonna choose to just cancel this and not crop it further. So as you can see, photo editing can accommodate for certain deficiencies when taking an initial photo, depending on what settings there are. It can't always fix everything. So that really just drives home the point that when you're doing photography for anything, whether it's, again, for fun, for business, or on the fly, if you have the time and the capacity in your camera's photo card, take the photo multiple times at multiple exposure settings from multiple angles, and at different zoom points, because you're never really sure until you get it into the computer and photo editing what shot is going to end up being the best and give you the most to work with for what it is that you were hoping to use it for. Thanks for watching.